Go ahead.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ira Robinson, and I have the pleasure of introducing the speaker this afternoon. Before I do, I want to reiterate what has been said on this. You should sign up on the sign-up sheet up there, where the lady is signing up right now, if you haven't already. And there are notices for several upcoming events, not merely from the Azrieli Institute, but from my own Institute for Canadian and Canadian Jewish Studies at Concordia. On March 8th, there will be a public lecture by Professor Morton Weinfeld of McGill in this building on the 7th floor. And on April 11th, there will be a conversation between myself and Professor Pierre Anquetil on anti-Semitism in Canada at the Jewish Public Library. Notices for both are available. It's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Ziv Rubinovitz got his doctorate in international relations from the University of Haifa in Israel, and his dissertation dealt with the geopolitics of the United States' use of force in the international arena since 1898. His major fields of research are American foreign policy and strategy, Israel's foreign policies issue, particularly the peace process with Egypt, U.S.-Israel relations. During his year with us at Concordia as a visiting researcher at the Azrieli Institute, his research is on the rise and decline of the concept of autonomy for Palestinians in the occupied territories in the years 1967 to 1982. And he will deal with this issue in part of today's lecture. He's published articles, one on Israel's role in the September 1970 crisis in Jordan, another on the alleged American decline as other powers rise in the international system, and we anticipate a really fine lecture from Dr. Rubinovitz.
Thank you very much. Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you for coming on Super Tuesday. I'm sure that everyone are anxious to see what's going on south from here. But today I will talk about obstacles on the road to peace. Unlike the title that you received, I decided last moment to just switch the topics, the order of topics. I'll start with the Sinai settlement, then I'll go to the oil, and I'll end with the autonomy. And I'll talk shortly about each and every one of them and explain what the problem was and how it was solved. I'm not going to describe the whole peace process between Israel and Egypt, but that will cost us about 37 years to finish. I mean, we're just now, end of this month will be the 37th anniversary of the peace. But you shouldn't. I will try to add a few comments, more broad, general comments during my talk. Okay, so just an outline. I will focus on these three issues that I mentioned. Two of these issues were directly connected to the bilateral relations between Israel and Egypt. The third one, the autonomy for the Palestinians, is outside their framework, but still was very, very dominant. Actually, was the biggest issue, the biggest problem here, more because of Egypt than because of Israel. I mean, Egypt was the one which demanded linking between whatever it will achieve with Israel and the Palestinian issue for inter-Arab relations they had. So, autonomy, I'll discuss the Palestinian issue, which is the Autonomy Plan, the West Bank settlement, and so on. That's basically the third topic. Okay, these are very small. I hope you can see all of this. It's a bit small. List of important dates since 1967, since Israel occupied Sinai, and until eventually they signed the peace treaty in March 1979. We'll get back to these on the way, so we don't need to waste time at the moment. Okay. The first thing that I want to say clearly is that both countries, Israel and Egypt, wanted to sign peace between themselves. Both of them had excellent reasons why to do it. Well, I'll get into that in a few seconds. The problem is, as you can see, it's a separate peace. That's what it's called. It was called that. It was Egypt and Israel, not the Arab world and Israel. All the time there was this concept going on since the post-Yom Kippur War era, since the end of 1973, that we're going for a regional settlement, which means all of the Arab states will sign a treaty with Israel. This is suddenly a break, okay? But both countries were highly motivated to do this. Israel for clear reasons, Egypt for perhaps less clear reasons, but actually they were very clear once you understand what they wanted. But the basic deal was very clear, very simple. Israel will withdraw from Sinai entirely. Okay, it's important. I'll get to that in a second. I mean, under Begin, it was clear it's entirely. Under the previous Labour government, it was not clear because Israel did not want to withdraw from all of Sinai. That means that there was no territorial dispute between Begin and Sadat. Okay? Then Sadat, Egypt, will be able to reapply its full sovereignty, as always Sadat was shouting, I want full sovereignty, and so on and so on. Okay, this is what he wants, this is what he gets. But there's a price. The price is demilitarization of Sinai, so that it will become a huge buffer zone between the Israeli army, Israeli territory, and the Egyptian army. Don't forget, we're just talking 4 to 6 years after the trauma of the Yom Kippur War, when suddenly Egyptian army was running into Sinai unexpectedly by at least the intelligence, Israeli intelligence. Although, of course, all of the indications were there. This was the conception. Okay, so now Israel is traumatized by that, and it demands that Sinai will be completely demilitarized, a huge buffer zone. And also there's an international peacekeeping force that will be there permanently, and you cannot take it out without both countries agreeing and the United Nations Security Council also agreeing to take it out. Okay, there's layers of shield to this international force. Again, take you back to 1967. One of the triggers to the war was that Nasser at that time told the UN keep peacekeeping force out, and they left. Okay, Israel had no say there. So this is now also part of the deal. What are the strategic gains? Very clearly, Egypt receives Sinai back in negotiations. Okay, no, not through war. If again after 1967 the Arab states said what was taken by force will be returned by force, by 1973 they understood. Egypt, Sadat specifically understood it won't happen. Israel is way too strong for that. Therefore, we'll need to do it through negotiations. That has a price to that, right? You need to go to whoever can actually have some leverage over Israel, that's the United States, and you will have to pay some price for that. Eventually, it would be the full diplomatic relations, full normalization, as Israel demanded of the Americans. This is the only thing that the Americans stood behind Israel entirely. It has to be full normalization. But also really important, since the U.S. is now the sponsor or the patron also of Egypt, Egypt needs American help, military. Okay, the whole Egyptian army moved from a Soviet-oriented army to an American one. So all of the equipment is changed. Put aside the tactics and so on, but that's it. So that's also something really important, and of course economically. In early 1977, there were food riots in Egypt because bread suddenly was really expensive. So Egypt needed help, humanitarian help, actually, from the United States. Israel, it's very clear what it wanted. It wanted to break the cycle. right? The hostile cycle, break also the Arab unity. If Sadat was talking sometimes separate, getting to a separate deal, sometimes as talking about regional deal. Nope. Israel is demanding that it actually completes making peace with Egypt and putting aside everyone else. I mean, they can join. Begin all the time insisted that this is only a first step toward the Arab-Israeli resolution, okay? But Egypt has to finish its part. That's what the major Israeli gain, strategic gain. But also, since Egypt now is becoming a very close ally of the United States, and Israel and Egypt were the most powerful regional powers in the Middle East, and the U.S. now was sponsoring both of them, Israel needed to make sure that the U.S. stays on its side as much as possible, and to deepen the relations. By the time Begin became prime minister, this was already happening. 1975. I'll mention that in another context, but 1975. The United States gave Israel guarantees that it never gave anyone before, just to get Israel to withdraw a few kilometers in Sinai, but very important kilometers there, including to its security, to its oil supply, and so on and so on. So, I mean, there was a track there that Begin actually joined what Rabin left him with. I'm not talking about the Americans here in this talk, but it's quite clear that the Americans should have been perhaps happy to be sole sponsors of making peace between the Israelis and the Arab, and at least one Arab state. Well, much more complicated than that, and that's why I'm not really going to get into that, because we don't have time to do that. This is the Sinai Peninsula, if anyone wondered about it. I think this would be a bit a nicer view of it. With my pointer, works. What I wanted to show is a few important points. Okay, so this is the Suez Canal. This is Eilat, Aqaba, Taba. Okay, here. This is Tiran. You see this island? This is the island of Tiran. These are the Tiran Straits, what the Egyptians blocked in 1956 and then 67, triggered 2 wars. Okay. This here is, you can't see it because there's nothing there now, but this is Ofira. This is a settlement, an Israeli settlement, just here on the corner, near Sharm el-Sheikh. And they were supposed to overview the Tiran Straits forever. I mean, permanently, to have an Israeli presence there to prevent the Egyptians from blocking it again, and then actually locking Eilat out of commerce, right? That's, again, it's a casus belli. Over here, you can't really see them, but there are 2 passes, really important passes. You'll see them on the map later, Gidi and Mitle. These are the passes that were the most important parts of the deal in 1975. Israel already gave them up. Over here, this is the Abu Ghudais oil field that Israel gave up in 1975. Again, we'll get to that. And over here, somewhere here in the sea, actually, is the Alma oil field that Israel was now demanded to return with all of the rest of Sinai in 1979. Why is that important? Oh, that's really important. At that point, we'll get to that in a few moments. Okay, so the 3 obstacles that we have in the Sinai settlements, it's really symbolic. It's actually symbolic, the settlements there. I mean, there are just a few, several thousand people, not more than that. It's not that a big deal, but Sadat demands them removed. Okay? Begin upheld Zionist convictions that settlements are not to be dismantled ever. I mean, settlement, I would say, when you hear settlement, you're thinking of any settlement that is built beyond the armistice line right in the West Bank, what most of the international community relates to as illegal settlement, right, in occupied territories. Well, settlement has 2 meanings in Hebrew. One is yishuv, which is any township, and you have also itnachalut, and itnachalut would be the one. But the really important thing here is that in the Zionist thought, Begin, of course, was completely into that, but he wasn't alone. Most of the Labor Party was there also, was that once you settle somewhere, you stay there. Part of the logic is this is how you eventually create your territory, your boundaries, your state's boundaries. Think of pre-state era, how the kibbutzim were spread all around in order to later make this a just cause when you demand that territory to be part of the Jewish state. Okay, so this is a part of the logic behind keeping settlements wherever they are. Oil was a critical issue to Israel because, well, it's written later, as you know, until at least several years ago when suddenly Israel found its natural gas in the Mediterranean, just north from Haifa. Israel was considered very unlucky, located in the Middle East without any drop of oil, and suddenly it had the Sinai, right, with all the oil around, so that it could find. And then it could supply itself with oil. Okay, let's run to the settlements. There are 23 settlements. You can see them here. This is the map that was used in Camp David that I found in the Carter Library. You see a list here of the settlements. This is actually a clearer map of where they are. Most of them are in the north. Okay, Pitrat Yamit, Pitrat Rafiach, actually, Hevel Yamit. They're located here for strategic security reason. Okay, there's nothing religious here. There's no ideology behind this. It's pure security. We'll get to that in a second. So most of the settlers actually were settled there by the labor, okay, Labor Party. Later on, when Camp David came to the Knesset, Yigal Allon abstained in the vote because he refused to take these settlements out. So you have the Yamit region. I'll say a few words about that. And Ophira, as I mentioned before, to overlook the Tiran Strait. Begin refuses to dismantle. His reasons are, of course, it's a precedent. Once you do that in this region, why won't you do it in other regions which are much more sensitive? Think of, this is a vast land, okay, quite open and empty. That's easy to defend still, there's time. But in the Golan Heights, to get to the Lake Tiberias is really easy. From Judea and Samaria to run into Netanya is 15 kilometers. It's really, really easy to do that. So there are risks there that he didn't want to take. There are, as I said, the Zionist convictions, but also really important is security. The whole logic of having these settlements here, just outside Gaza from southwest, okay, over this area, his foreign minister could tell him, Moshe Dayan could tell him, as a defense minister, that's why he put them there, because he wanted to have a barrier, a Jewish barrier between Sinai and Gaza. Gaza now has what, about 1.8 million people, then there are many less, but still, that's a huge crowd, and you want to separate them from the other Arab world for strategic reasons, because all of this area is quite flat, and an army can just join the Gaza and just flood into Israel. That's the logic, the strategic logic that they were thinking of. So, Israel demands to keep the settlements there, and also to have IDF forces defending them. So that says, no way. Okay, let's keep them there and put a UN security force there. No way. So that says, no way. They must be dismantled. He's even willing to have Israelis live in Cairo if they want, just not in these settlements. Okay? It's a principle. Again, it's symbolic. So Israel was really adamant about this, even up to the very end of the Camp David summit in September 1978. Begin always insisted on the security reasons, and why they need to be there. Again, there is a reason why he's doing that. Sinai is not part of Eretz Israel, okay? Not part of Palestine. If you have the map in mind of what exactly is Palestine, modern Palestine, which is now Israel, the occupied territories in Jordan. Sinai is not part of that. Sinai is recognized as part of Egypt, okay, since 1906, between the Ottomans and the British. And Begin accepted that. This is a deposit for peace. This is a decision that Israel had made secretly in 1967, a week after the Six-Day War. Okay? And Begin is actually now implementing that, the same logic. Okay, so Sinai is not holy, therefore there's nothing ideological about the settlements there except for the Zionist conviction of not removing settlements. 2 days before the end of Camp David, Israel's position started crumbling because Israel accepted that the 3 air bases will be removed. There were 3 air bases in Sinai. They will be removed in return for 2 new bases that the Americans will build for Israel in the Negev desert. So the security reasoning starts to crumble, and then the settlements have no, their fate is doomed. There is nothing to hold them there. September 16, 1978, the last night of Camp David, Carter and Vance, Secretary of State, meet with Begin, Dayan, the Foreign Minister, and Aaron Barak, the Attorney General. A very heated debate. As you see, Egypt is not there. And they are talking about the autonomy, they're talking about Sinai, and they make a deal. Begin refuses to give up on the settlements. He's saying, actually, in internal discussion of the Israeli delegation, he's telling Dayan and Weizmann, why should we decide on our own? Us 3. I mean, 3 of them are members of Knesset. They're the senior politicians in Israel at that point. Why should we do that? They'll hang us when we come back. So instead, they find a solution that from what I understand, it's an idea that Dayan brought up, and he sold it to Carter, and from there, eventually also Begin accepted. Let's take the whole question of the settlements to the Knesset. Okay? There's actually a legal reasoning for that. The Knesset actually approved these settlements, so it's the Knesset's decision now to take them out of Sinai. Okay, so there was also a legality. So the Knesset knew when it came to 2 weeks after Camp David, actually a week and a half, the Knesset knew that if it doesn't approve withdrawing the settlements or dismantling them, peace negotiations will not begin. Now, it's really important to understand that the Camp David Accords are only a framework. So it's not the peace treaty. The peace treaty was negotiated for half a year and signed, as I said, in March 1979. This is only principle, okay? But without that, if you're not, now, if the Knesset does not decide to withdraw these settlements, we're not even starting negotiation with you. Okay. Begin tried to argue that he will propose it. He won't tell the Knesset his own wishes, but it might not pass. Carter said, I think it will. From all of the analysis that he received, he had a different position than Begin. It's interesting, by the way, that Begin did not take the decision out of his own hands. I mean, he refused to take it alone. But he decided, not only me, not only the government, I'll take you to the Knesset. 120 people, I'm one of them, and we will all have to decide this. Okay? He did, of course, as a Democrat, he did promise to accept the majority rule on the settlements. At first, there were to be two votes, one on the settlements, one on the entire deal. At some point, Begin decided, nope, let's make it one. Also forcing him to make up his mind very clearly. And and Begin did threaten to resign if the majority of the coalition, which of course was the problem, right-wing coalition then, did not support it. Okay. He knew that probably Labor would support, although not all of them had. Okay. It ended with 84 deciding in favor. Okay, only 46 of them were from the coalition, but that was 2/3 of the coalition. So it's okay. Begin did not need to resign as he promised or threatened. 19 were against. 10 of them were from the coalition. One of them I mentioned, two of them I mentioned, Moshe Arens, later ambassador to the US, foreign minister, defense minister, and Ehud Olmert. You know what he offered 30 years later. Quite interesting to see where he started, okay, when it came to real peace. 4 from the Labor voted against, 4 for the Communist Party, but the rest of the opposition were in favor. Except for, of course, there were 17 abstained, including Yitzhak Shamir, who was the Speaker of the Knesset at that time, and later Foreign Minister, and then replaced Begin as Prime Minister, and Yigal Allon from the Labor, okay, who decided not to vote against, but he wasn't in favor because of the settlements. With this approval, you can start the peace negotiations in Washington, and you think that it's over? Of course not. 1982, when the settlements were supposed to be evacuated, April 1982, it came to a violent collision. As you can see here, on the roofs are the settlers, and these are the soldiers coming up and trying to get them off. Okay, it was very, very nasty, but it ended with physically demolishing Yamit, a whole city, a whole town, burying it in the sand of Sinai, and that's the settlements. Oil. Since 1967, Israel controlled the Abu Ghodis oil field, and later Alma, and other. And for the first time in its history, it had oil that it could supply to itself. Okay, it could pump out quite a significant portion of its needs from Sinai. In 1975, Israel was demanded to withdraw from Abu Ghodis, which is, as you remember, on the western coast of Sinai. Okay. Once it did that, once it agreed, it became much more dependent on imports, especially from Iran. Iran was #1 supplier of Israeli oil, to Israel in the 1960s and 70s. Now, in 1975, it became even more dependent on that. So these are the two agreements, Sinai 1, Sinai 2. This is 1974, the separation of forces. But this is the more important one, where, as you see, the Gidi Pass and the Mitle Pass, the only strategic blocks that Israel had to stop the Egyptian army from running into Israel, okay, into Sinai and then into Israel. There's nothing beyond that. And here you have the Abu Ghodis oil field. All of this was returned to Egypt in late 1975. And I'm not going into that deal because we are short on time. But just then, when Israel is so short on oil, and don't forget, we have an international oil crisis at that time. The Arab boycott works very well in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War. There is a crisis, and later on, 1979, there's a second oil crisis because of Iran, or partly because of Iran, sorry, not exclusively. Israel sees that its supplier, Iran, is no longer secure. The Shah, the only figure that Israel is actually in real contact with and he's an ally, is starting to lose control. And Israel sensed it much before the Americans did. It's quite clear that once he falls, Iran's relations with Israel are basically done, and oil will no longer come from Iran. We need help. We need oil. So, first of all, they're starting to look for oil in Sinai, as long as it's under Israel's control. They find, as I said, the Alma oil fields, but once you make the decision to make peace with Egypt, you'll need to give it back. A big, big problem. The Shah left Iran in January. In February, there was the revolution. The Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. Just then, it was in the middle of the discussions between Israel and Egypt after Camp David and before the peace treaty. And this is exactly when it became critical. So already in October, when Iran went into martial law because domestically it was deteriorating, Israel brought it up. Look, we need oil. We need Egyptian oil. Let's have Egypt sell us oil. We'll pay for that. I mean, it's oil that now we have invested in these oil fields, but we will now pay for this oil because we need it. And again, forget about natural gas, forget about anything else. This is the only thing that Israel knew that it could have is the oil fields from Sinai. Okay, let's skip this. And we're here, when Israel's bringing up this problem. Israel demands 2.5 million tons of oil per year from Sinai on a long-term contract. Many years ahead. Egypt says no. There's no such thing. It's called in the oil market. It's called evergreen agreements. There are 1-year agreements that you can renew or not renew, but you need to renew them every year. This is how it goes. Also, really problematic for Israel is that Egypt said, "We're not selling you directly. We'll sell it to the Americans." There's an American company that was supposed to take over the oil field. We'll sell it to them, and they can sell it to you if they want. Or let's make it under agreement that they will sell it to you, but not directly. Israel said, "Excuse me, that's ill faith. I mean, are you really into the peace between us? I mean, we're signing peace here. This is a litmus paper for the peace for Israel, and it's strategic. I mean, without oil, a country is dead, especially if it's modernized or modernizing." Why not tell directly? I mean, Ariel Sharon is asking eventually, and not only him, Shmuel Tamir, the justice minister, also asked Carter when he was in Israel in March 1979, when he met the whole cabinet, why not sell us directly? I mean, what's the problem here? Okay, this is where you need a guarantee. So this is where the Americans decided, Carter is saying to the whole cabinet, we will guarantee that you will not lose oil. The idea was that Egypt will sell you when you need, but if they do not supply all that you need, all of your needs, we will supply that. From where? Good question, because the Americans are short on oil themselves, right? It's in the middle of their second crisis, within 5 years of oil. Okay, just to remind you, 1975, Ford already gave an oil guarantee to Israel, to Rabin. Now it's actually, that was for 5 years, now Carter is offering the first 10 years. He makes it eventually 15, as you can see, because he understands that without that, Israel will not sign the treaty. Also, don't forget that because of the crisis, it's not really guaranteed that the American Congress will approve of the guarantee, and Begin, especially Begin, is very concerned for for Israel's public stand in America, that the American public will come against Israel because they're taking our oil. So the treaty that included the oil guarantee was signed in March 1979, actually parallel to the peace treaty with Egypt, but it came into effect only a year and a half later, in October 1980, when there was actually a specific oil agreement between Israel and the U.S. So, as I said, Israel wanted to compel Egypt to sell it, oil, within the peace treaty, but that will, of course, should have showed the Egyptians commitment and sincerity in the peace treaty, but because of lack of trust here and Egypt's refusal, the Americans needed to step in, and they did. Okay, well, let's skip. Oh, one thing is important. At this point, the relations between Carter and Begin are so bad, there's no trust at all between them. There are loggerheads on everything. And still, Israel makes this, I call it a leap of faith, and accepts the American guarantee as is. without actually ensuring that the Americans have somewhere to bring that oil from. I mean, it's real. They just do it because Israel has a strategic gain in making peace with Egypt. It needed that peace, and Carter said, enough is enough, I can't deal with this anymore, I have to put it aside. Okay, oil guarantee was renewed in 1994 by Clinton for a decade, later Bush Jr. Renewed it, but President Obama didn't. So, this is at least what I could find until now. I didn't see that it was renewed, but for 35 years it was an oil guarantee. Okay, let's skip what to do with the West Bank. Big question, short time. There is a clear difference between having a territorial settlement, which means statehood, some kind of statehood, or what is called a functional settlement, which means that Israel will continue to control the territory, but the Palestinians will have some kind of functional self-rule over, say, civic affairs. Okay, Begin, of course, was in the function. How does it work? I mean, you can joke about it that you'll put there will be a separation between the people and the territory. They will no longer step on the territory. They will be independent, but the territory will not. How exactly do you do that? It seems ridiculous, perhaps, to some people, but there was logic behind it. Begin, not only because of pressures from Carter and from Sadat, wanted to come up with a solution, his solution. He was talking about it since 1967. He's starting to think about what to do with the Palestinians. He recognizes them. Okay, unlike Golda Meir, who said there is no Palestinian people. He said yes, there is, but he says the Palestinian people includes, of course, the Jews. Okay, everyone were Palestinian under the British rule. But once Israel was established, that was the self-determination of the Palestinians. The Arabs don't have that right to have their own state. What is he offering? Autonomy. A civic autonomy, not military. Nothing of foreign affairs will be under their own control. So, Begin, of course, calls the occupied territories, or everyone calls it the West Bank. He's calling it by the Hebrew names Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Yehuda, Shomron, Retzuat Aza. Retzua Strip. Okay? He actually, 4 days before signing the peace, he's sending a telegram to his ambassador in Washington, furious about another maneuver that the Egyptians and Americans are trying to do with the last drafting of the peace treaty. And he's telling them, stop calling it the West Bank. I mean, there's a side letter about the West Bank, about the name that Israel says that what the entire world will see as the West Bank, Israel sees as Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. He said, it's a lie to call it the West Bank because everything on the west of Jordan, the West Bank of Jordan, until the Mediterranean is the West Bank. So where is Israel in all of this? Of course, it's not really semantic. I mean, there is substance behind it, but still, this is the logic that Begin proceeds to this. So. Security, the most important thing, security will be run by Israel. Only by Israel, okay? Jews are not strangers in the territories. This is something that Dayan said and so many others. We're not strangers. We're allowed to be there. We are allowed, the Israelis say, to settle there. But Begin, in his plan, offers exactly the same right to the Palestinians, which means Arabs from the West Bank, okay, from the occupied territories, are allowed to settle in Israel. Something that many people miss in the story. Citizenship and voting, everyone can. I mean, the Palestinians. Begin was fortunate enough to receive a situation where the Palestinians are Jordanians, right? They were naturalized by King Abdullah in 1950. So all of the Palestinians actually are Jordanians and should have rights to vote for the Jordanian parliament. If any Palestinian Now, no one moves from anywhere. No, everyone settles, remain in their own towns. No one needs to move anywhere. Okay? If they want to become Israeli and vote for the Knesset, they can. Okay? But since they're not Jewish, then the Chok HaShvut does not apply to them. And what they do have is the regular nationality laws that apply. So it will take them several years, but eventually they will be allowed to vote and even be elected to the Knesset. Okay. This is a really interesting map that I found at the Carter Library, showing you. These are the settlements before Begin came to power, and this is the map in dark. In black is the settlements that Begin added. Okay, the Begin government approved or added until I think 1980, if I remember correctly. So they're spreading more, of course, than before, but forget about what you know now. Okay, it's really, really, really sparsely populated, right, by Israelis at this point. So this is basically where the plan for the autonomy begins. Okay, from this view. Okay, Begin probably would like his plan to become the permanent situation between Israel and the Palestinians, but of course that was far less than what both the Americans and the Egyptians were willing to accept there. Okay? Okay, let's move on. The autonomy talks began. Sadat wanted a linkage, which means until we don't agree on establishing that autonomy, I'm not implementing peace. No, I'm not normalizing. Begin said, no way. There is no linkage, and eventually he won. There is no linkage, okay? But still, there is no linkage, and the talks over autonomy begin a month after we sign the peace treaty. Sadat at the very last moment tried to throw in a goat, the liaison officers into the Gaza Strip. Begin said, forget about it. And he did, because he wanted Sinai back. Okay, Begin had the leverage here. Begin at some point threatened, as I said in that telegram, threatened, if you don't stop with these games, I'm not coming to sign the peace treaty, which would be a huge blow to both Sadat and to Carter. So Sadat conceded, peace was implemented fully, although of course it became cold, especially after Sadat was assassinated. Autonomy talks began in May 1979, and they died out in early 1982, after Reagan already was for a year president. I mean, there was no American incentive, personal incentive here to push forward. Autonomy was never established, and the Oslo Accords are completely different in so many aspects that it's not really the child, okay, of the autonomy plan, although it's easy to think otherwise. Okay, so on a happy note, March 26th, peace was signed, and Israel eventually did withdraw. You can see here the years where Israel, the phased withdrawal. Of course, this is a quite new one, so it also mentions Gaza from 2005. And with this happy note, I will end and expect your questions. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, hello. What is Jordan's very interesting presentation? Thank you. I remember watching Sadat's visit to Jerusalem as a young kid and trying to listen to the Hebrew and how exciting it was. And we couldn't believe this was happening. So it was very exciting. And I was just wondering, could you discuss perhaps, I realize it wasn't exactly part of the subject of the talk, maybe the evolution of Jordan's position on these issues, and do they have claims to the Palestinian territories they renounce? Because I looked at a chronology last night.
Right.
It says King Hussein renounces their jurisdiction and.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's really beyond my story for today.
But as regional actors, or a set of regional peace initiatives.
Always, yes.
Yeah.
The thing is that there are two states now, Israel and Jordan, since 1946. Jordan since 1948, Israel, and there is the territory.
22.
No. 22 is under the British Mandate of Palestine, they just broke Palestine into two. One was Transjordan and Emirate, not independent. Until 1946, they were not independent. And the rest of Palestine, west of the Jordan River, remained Palestine. Okay, in 1946 they gave Jordan independence. Since then it's called the Hashemite Kingdom, and Emir Abdallah became King Abdallah the First. Okay, and there's the territories Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem, which Jordan took over, occupied illegally, if you want, invaded a territory that is not its.
הייתי במוסק לא ידעתי שזה הקודש הקודשים, לא יכלתי ללכת.
Okay. They took that and they controlled that for 19 years. As I said, in 1950, the Abdallah naturalized the Palestinians. It was annexing Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem into Jordan. Okay, two countries accepted that: Pakistan and Great Britain, United Kingdom. East Jerusalem, even the British couldn't accept that. Only Pakistan accepted that East Jerusalem was part of Jordan. This is where, after 1967, there's a Jordanian claim to get these territories, Judea and Samaria, back, okay? Which Israel says no all the time. In 1988, what happened was that Jordan, King Hussein, announced, I no longer have that claim. I'm no longer making that claim. From now on, this is the Jordanian option. It's dead. If you remember the 1987, there was the London Accords agreement between Shimon Peres and who was then Foreign Minister, and King Hussein. That was dead. That's it. No more. I mean, there was always two views of what to do with the territories. One is the Palestinian option, which means dealing with the Palestinians in the territory, solving the problem with them by giving them statehood, autonomy, annexing to Israel, whatever. The other option was the Jordanian, which means the Autonomy Plan, if you remember that, from 1962, which would be physically cutting up Judea and Samaria into two, so that Jordan will control the Arabs, but Israel will control less populated areas, but important for its security, and so on and so on. That was the Jordanian option, to have the Jordanians into the territory back functionally. Okay? This is something that Israel played with for many years until Jordan said, no, enough is enough. The Palestinians now are on their own, and you're alone with the Palestinians. So yeah, they did have a claim. In the late 70s, they still would have a claim. I mean, Begin did not just think in thin air about this, but we'll deal with Jordan and who gets sovereignty over this. By the way, I didn't mention this, but part of the deal was that Israel is putting its claim for sovereignty over the territories aside for 5 years. The 5 years of the interim agreement, the autonomy era, Israel will put it aside and then will claim it for the final solution for the territory, final settlement, sorry. This is where Israel will put it back on the table. Okay, so that's the Jordanian. I hope I answered the question.
Yes,
Okay, I'd like to ask about the timing in 1977, because in 1977, as you point out, Begin and the Likud come to power, and that's a tectonic shift in Israel. And there were several places in your very fine lecture where you seem to imply that Begin was probably an easier partner for negotiations than the previous Labor government for several reasons. As far as you're able to understand, were the Americans and the Egyptians understanding that this might possibly be because in the popular response to this tectonic shift was they remembered the Begin who was besmirched for decades as a semi-fascist or maybe even an out-and-out fascist, and definitely persona non grata, etc., and now he's in charge of the store. So could you expatiate on that?
Yes. I didn't get into that. Again, that's part of the bigger story here. It's true that Begin was always seen as a warmonger. It was logical to do that because his writings, his speeches actually spoke of capturing, when time comes, capturing the territories that are not yet in our position, Israel's position, that is. So there was logic to do that. Yes, he was, smeared by the labor for many years as a danger. Once he's in power, Israel goes to war. The problem is that when it came to Egypt, his position was more sophisticated, and actually Carter didn't understand that at all at the beginning, but Sadat did. Apparently, this is his testimony, that he understood that it's actually good that Begin won. Unlike Carter, which even when he saw, he met Rabin, he didn't know that he would be an outgoing prime minister, but in March 1977, with their first meeting, and he was completely adamant. Rabin was completely adamant, and it was a horrible meeting. But he still thought that the labor would be much more flexible and reasonable, according to Carter's logic, than Likud, especially under Begin, because of what he knew about Begin, which was basically nothing. 2 days after the elections, he got a memo through Brzezinski from Quant. William Quant was the Middle East specialist and NSC to Brzezinski, explaining what happened. They had no scenario where Begin wins. No scenario at all. Suddenly, he's the designated prime minister. What do we do? Basically, Quant was suggesting allow him to fall on his own words, or his own sword, if you want. Just let him fall. Within 2 years, they'll replace him. That's the logic that the Americans had at that point. So they didn't understand. And at that point, there was a book that came out, I think it's called Terror Out of Zion, which immediately was delivered to Carter to see who exactly this person is that is now the Prime Minister of Israel, who he knew nothing about. But again, Begin made it very clear what his position on Sinai was. And this is exactly what Sadat wanted. Full withdrawal. If you remember the map of Sinai, I showed you Ophira, okay, Sharm el-Sheikh. The labor, the moderates, right? They wanted to keep that strip from Sharm el-Sheikh in the south until Eilat. All of that stays ours in order to prevent the Egyptians from blocking Eilat again. Okay? They wanted the whole strip. Egypt demands a full withdrawal. Begin says, I'm willing for a full withdrawal, no problem at all. You'll just pay a price for that, but I'm willing to withdraw. So Sadat very quickly understood that he does have a partner, a good partner there. Also, it's not only the initial position, also very quickly Begin started signaling to Sadat. The first visit after the US was in late August 1977. He went to Romania to meet Ceausescu, who was a personal friend of Sadat, to pass a message that we can talk, we should talk. He sent Dayan to talk with the Shah, again, personal friend of Sadat. Again, let's talk. And very quickly, in September, Sadat sent his deputy prime minister, Touhami, to meet Dayan in Morocco, and this is where it started. That two months later, Sadat then declared suddenly in the parliament in Cairo that he's willing to go to the end of earth, even to Jerusalem, to talk with the Israelis about making peace. And Israel said, Ahlan Musala. So, yes, he knew. Very quickly, Sadat knew that he had someone. This is exactly, again, I didn't want to get into this, but the Americans had the regional view in mind, the concept of let's reassemble Geneva, the Geneva Conference, let's make it a regional negotiation agreement. And because of how they conducted it, I mean, getting the Soviets back in after Sadat was working so hard to get it out, and so on and so on, Sadat said enough is enough. Begin said enough is enough. Let's just meet. And this is what happened. The Americans lost control for a short but very critical time. They knew nothing. They did not know about the meeting in Morocco between Touhami and Dayan, because Touhami told Dayan, don't tell the Americans about it. He said, okay. So they were left in the dark for quite a while, but very quickly after the first meeting between Begin and Sadat in Jerusalem, the Americans were needed back in because there was, Sadat called it a psychological gap, but there was actually much, much more than that, and they needed the American leverage, both sides. Since then, this is a part of my reading of all of this, is since then, both sides, Egypt and Israel, were playing the Americans against one another.
I'd just like to finish it. Thank you very much for a nice lecture. I'd just like to finish it in a very nice tone. What Golda Meir said to Sadat when he arrived in Jerusalem. Anybody know?
Oh, she said a few things, but okay.
Well, what took you so long?
Yes, true, that's all.
What did he answer? Does anyone know?
Well, he said, let me talk to you as a grandfather to a grandmother.
Yeah, okay.
And she gave him a gift because he just had a granddaughter.
Yeah, obviously.
It was a very interesting time.
Yeah.
I'm just bothered by one thing. You said that the Israelis are allowed to live in the territories, and yet Palestinians are allowed to live in Israel, but they're not getting citizenship.
No.
As far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't, but
Right. No.
then there is a little discrepancy.
Okay, no, I'm not
When a
talking.
stranger listens to this conversation,
Yeah.
we
No,
are,
I need to
We're-
clarify.
okay?
This is Begin's plan. If it were implemented, that would be part of it. Reality, since it wasn't implemented, the reality is different. But the idea, Begin's idea, was that everyone in the territory called Palestine, okay, Israel and the occupied territory, the West Bank, would be one unified territory under one rule, and everyone could live anywhere. Jews can live in the occupied territories, just as Palestinians from that occupied can move into Israel freely and live in Israel, buy apartments, even be elected to the Knesset and so on, everything. But there was a condition here that this would be implemented. Okay, since it wasn't, reality became different. Or actually remained as it was then. That people do not. But there are, of course, Palestinians who do receive citizenship in Israel through marriage and so on. So it's not completely that they don't become. But of course, there is no right of return. The official
The right to return.
yeah, if you're talking massive as a people, not as individuals, then yes, of course, that's the position. Begin would not change that at all. That wasn't the idea. The idea was to allow them to run their lives there. All of those who are in the diaspora, in the Palestinian diaspora, wasn't even Begin wouldn't even discuss it at that point. I don't know of anything that he any way that he would put them into the autonomy plan, not that I saw. So that was a completely different issue. I'm talking of only the Palestinians, the inhabitants of the occupied territory, what to do with them. The idea was was to allow them the most civic rights as he can. Begin was a real liberal, and he was a real Democrat. But he was also a real nationalist. Everything was real here with him. And this is how this is the balance that he could find. The fact that it was only in his mind that it could work is a different issue. But for him, the logic was clear how to work it out.
very much.
Thank you.